it's not practical it's not possible for a software developer, especially a little independent, to handle every type of mount. Hey, Blake here. Welcome back. This is part 2 in my 6-part video series on using Stellarium to drive a telescope mount. Now, this particular part is about platform independent solutions. And I'm focusing in on ASCOM. That's what I need for my solution. That's because I determined by doing research that I needed a driver that was only available in the ASCOM environment. There was not direct driver support inside Stellarium. And I'm on the Windows platform, so the ASCOM solution was the viable option. People that are on the Mac platform or on Linux platform have been in a bit of a quandary for a while because there's not been good support for different devices and mount drivers and things like that. The ASCOM product was born on the Windows environment, but they are trying to do something about that. The INDI products are coming at this from a completely different direction. They're embracing Mac users and Linux users right from the get-go and providing some Windows support. So this is about sort of what this environment is, if it's very new to you, what it's supposed to do, where you can find the appropriate software and get the relevant sort of drivers. My experience was when I look inside Stellarium and I look in the options Stellarium directly through a serial port and then look in the device model list down at the bottom, I did not see my mount. I have an IDEA GoToStar system. It's esoteric, it's weird. It's on a Vixen mount, but that shouldn't be a factor. It's an IDEA GoToStar system. So I'm looking for a driver that supports that. You might have an Ioptron telescope. You might have a Vixen, an astrophysics mount, or a Paramount, or you've got a Takahashi or something like that. So those are not listed in the Stellarium telescope model menu. There's no mount support for those. So what do? Well, you got to do some research. Go look at the ASCOM websites. Go look in the INDI websites, if you're on Windows or Mac respectively, and see if you can find driver support for your mount. And there's a good chance you will. So what is this big picture? If you're curious, if we look at it from the mount side of things, you've got a company that builds a hardware mount and they make the hand controller that works with that. And maybe that's all they care about. They go, okay, we're done. That's all we need to do. We have a working mount with a hand controller. But some mount manufacturers want to make it possible to use it from a computer or use it from a remote location. So they might provide software that can connect to it, but that's all going to be kind of proprietary. It's in their language and environment and format and so on. On the other side, you've got software manufacturers like the Stellarium people, Sky Tools, Astro Planner, Starry Night, that they're trying to write software and they'd like to provide mount control, but there's dozens of popular mounts out there, and each mount manufacturer has a whole bunch of different telescope mounts. When you add it all up, there's a myriad, thousands of different sort of solutions there, it's not practical it's not possible for a software developer, especially a little independent, to handle every type of mount. And some of the mount manufacturers may not want to surrender their proprietary information as well. So we're sort of between. We can't get the software to talk to the mount, but that's where ASCOM or INDI comes in. They're saying to the telescope mount people, hey, just write in ASCOM. Make your stuff ASCOM compliant or ASCOM compatible. And every time I say ASCOM, you can substitute INDI. And the software manufacturers, they don't have to write drivers for every single mount that's out there. They can just write for ASCOM or INDI. That's it. And then we've got this software in the middle, the ASCOM or INDI platform or environment. It's called the INDI server, and it's middleware. It sits in between these two ends, and it intercommunicates between them. It's an interpreter. So it translates from one system to the other system. It means for the users, it's simple, it's trivial. We don't have to sort of worry about that. It makes it easier for the manufacturers. It makes it easier for the software developers. So it's sort of a win-win all around. So again, if you have an unusual mount, there's probably an ASCOM or an INDI driver. And then the software that you want to use, in our case, we're talking about Stellarium, it supports ASCOM or INDI. Stellarium can talk in those two languages, plus a few others. So we have a good solution then, if we can get them talking on the same language. Now, some people are trying to do other stuff. If you want to do imaging, you might have a camera and a filter wheel. If you have a CCD camera, you might have an electronic focuser. You might have a guide scope and guide camera. If you have a full robotic setup, you've got sensors on the observatory. You may have a rotatable roof, or the roof or dome window can be open and closed. You might have robotically controlled power systems, and almost all modern sort of devices have ASCOM support or INDI support. So this is great. It means you can choose your platform. On Windows, the ASCOM is very popular and matured, well developed. The newcomer is INDI for Mac and Linux. So you just find your drivers for all your special equipment and your mount driver, and you're on your way. I mention all these devices because if you're doing this, if you're an imager and you want to control the camera, that forces your hand. You're going to have to go with ASCOM or INDI to control all your devices in addition to the mount. If you aren't doing any of these things, if you're just a visual astronomer, but you just want to use Stellarium to choose targets and go to them, and you're only using mount control, you may not need ASCOM or INDI. I talked about that in my primer video. But I'm assuming in this case, we need it because we're going this particular path of using multiple devices, or we have an unusual mount. Bunch of different scenarios. I'm using it with my Vixen Super Polaris, which I've hacked with the IDEA GoToStar system, and that's a working solution. We have a Nexstar 11 up at our club observatory, and I often use that instead of lugging my telescope around. So I bring my computer, I connect it to that mount, and I drive that mount. And I've got the appropriate Celestron Nexstar controls and an ASCOM driver, and I'm doing some special things with that. I also wanted to use my computer to drive the Paramount, and that, you know, at first I thought, oh, it's not possible because the Sky is proprietary software, but there is a way to do it through ASCOM, so that's pretty neat. I hook up my computer to the Paramount. I send commands via ASCOM. It actually goes through the Sky, and then it commands the mount. So that's really good. I'm happy when I can do that. I mentioned before that I helped a friend with his Losmendi GM8 and the Gemini 1 system, second edition, to get it connected to Stellarium. I had to build a custom cable, custom serial cable, but we got that working and he was really happy. And I wrote an article recently for the RASC journal where I was reviewing the EQMod software, the whole family of products. And to test it, I used a Skywatcher, and that's a typo, NEQ5 Pro mount, and with a SynScan hand controller where I updated the firmware, and I drove that via ASCOM, and it worked great. It was fine. So I've used ASCOM on the Windows environment in a whole bunch of different scenarios, and a lot of these work well. And I had used my Vixen Super Players with different software. I'd never used it with Stellarium until very recently. So that's partly why I'm sharing all this information. A bit of history, big picture stuff. Where did ASCOM come from? It was a community of developers, astronomers who wanted to have a device independent environment where any gear could be hooked up to any software, and it would make it easier for all concerned, the manufacturers, the software developers, and the users. Now, it was born on the Windows environment, and it's tied closely or tightly to the .NET environment in Windows, and that's why it's challenging or difficult for non-Windows users to use this environment. But they are sensitive to that. There's an Alpaca product or set of tools that's being used to expand the ASCOM solution to work on different computer systems. So it makes sense, right? To be a truly device independent environment, they need to spread their wings a little bit. The INDI and the INDIGO environments, as I mentioned before, are coming at this from a completely different direction. They're going, let's support Mac, let's support Linux, we'll support Windows people too, but they've got lots of software that they can use, but let's support these other computer systems in a true sort of agnostic device independent environment. So for ASCOM or for INDI, you got to download a kind of a base product. It's called the platform in ASCOM. It's a server in INDI. And in our case, we're trying to drive a mount with our Stellarium, so we need to find our mount driver. And if you look at the ASCOM website, you'll see there's support for Mead and Celestron, like we saw the built-in support inside Stellarium, but there's also support for astrophysics, for EQMod, some Ioptron, some Vixen, things, even the Sky Commander. So there's broader support, more mounts are supported in the ASCOM environment. So again, the spirit of it is, if you looked at my first video, I was telling you, if you don't need ASCOM, don't introduce it. If you have direct internal support and you're just doing simple stuff, you don't need ASCOM or INDI. But if you're doing other things or you have an unusual mount, now you got to go one of these two routes, ASCOM/Alpaca, or the INDI and the INDIGO route. And also, this is not something that's terribly obvious, but be aware of or sensitive to the bitness of the driver. The driver that I used for my hand controller is a 32-bit driver, and that in turn affected what I needed to do with Stellarium. I'll talk about that later. So if you think you need an ASCOM solution, if you're a Windows computer user and you need an unusual mount driver, or you're trying to drive multiple devices, head to the ASCOM website. You can see the address up at the top, ascom-standards.org. This is the main page that you'll see. And front and center, actually, you'll see that they're talking about, a demo, and they're talking about Alpaca. There's a link to Alpaca. So again, you can see that they're committed to supporting not just the Windows environment. They have a handy link to the Groups IO environment so you can chat with users. But first order of business is to download the platform. And you can see they've got a handy link for that. So you download that, you install it, and that part's done. If you were to start up Stellarium after that, you would see that the ASCOM driver is now available. It's possible that you can use it and select it. So that's good. I did that a few weeks ago on my laptop computer, and I'll show you that shortly. So you need the base or the platform of the server. Then you need the mount driver. So I clicked on the downloads. I went into the telescope mounts. You can see all the devices that they support. It's pretty neat, again, what ASCOM can do. So that's good stuff. And here we are on the telescope mount driver page, and there's lots of things. Hey, there's the ASCOM 2X, which I use to drive the Paramount. So that's one of the solutions that I already use. But if you scroll down all the way down to the bottom of the page, you'll see there's lots of things, including Takahashi. There's Skywatcher SynScan support, Sky Commander support, all alphabetically arranged. And I had heard through the grapevine, actually an old Yahoo group, that the Vixen Sky Sensor 2000 worked with the INDIGO GoToStar system. I tried the iOptron drivers, they didn't work. I tried a few different ones. I tried different permutations. None of that worked. I was getting discouraged. And then I heard somewhere that somebody used the Vixen Sky Sensor 2K and it worked. So I downloaded that. I installed it on the ASCOM platform. I tested it. It was good. I had a solution. So I'd done that years ago, so I just did it again. On my laptop, I downloaded the ASCOM Platform 6, then I downloaded the known good Vixen Sky Sensor driver, so I knew I was on my way. You will notice that there's different buttons here. Download, this means you're getting it straight from the ASCOM people, but in some cases you visit the site. So this is where the mount manufacturer, they do it. They write the ASCOM driver. And those drivers are usually quite robust. They're very feature rich. So that's good. You might even get a virtual hand controller out of some of those. So that was a good solution I learned about years ago, and I just retraced my footsteps. I downloaded the ASCOM platform and the mount driver that I knew worked with my mount to proceed. So that's the ASCOM pathway that you might follow. The INDI experience, I don't have much experience with this, but I think the broad strokes are the same. You need to download the INDI server, get that installed and working, and then you need some sort of driver for your mount, for your device. So you're gonna download an appropriate device driver of some kind. And there's lots and lots of support, and it's getting better and better all the time in the INDI environment. So the client is Stellarium in this case. That snapshot is for K-stars on Linux, but that's the software that you're using to issue commands, and it goes through the server. It does all the translation. It's the interpreter, and then you've got a mount driver that is speaking INDI language and knows how to interpret the commands and issue responses and feedback to the INDI server, which then is echoed in the client software. A friend of mine in the astronomy center actually showed me his setup recently. He has a Skywatcher AZ GTI mount, and it has a SynScan hand controller. And he is using the INDI software because he's running all of this on a Raspberry Pi. So he's got this very, very small computer. He's running the K-star software as the planetarium, and he's got a GPS sensor, and he's got a guide scope and a guide camera on it. You can see all the tabs there for all the devices and a mirrorless camera, but we're showing the telescope mount control tab, and he's connected and he's tracking the way that he wants, and he's got controls for slewing and checking his sync and changing the rate and so on. That's quite a robust control system for that mount. And the coolest thing, what I like most about his setup, is that the telescope, it's got some wires on it between the mount and the computer and stuff like that, but he operates the rig with a wireless device, a wireless computer, a wireless tablet. So he's not physically connected to the mount, and it's all working well. Now, he just told me the other day that he didn't like using the K-stars software, so he has changed his software to Stellarium. He wanted to use that, and he said he got it working. So I might do a deep dive into that, a separate video that shows all the moving parts to that. But this shows you a working solution using the INDI device independent environment. What I've shown you here is that ASCOM or INDI might be needed to do what you want. And I had to do it in my case because I have a weird mount. And in particular, I have an unusual, rare, old, obsoleted GoTo system, the IDEA GoToStar system. But through research, I found that the Vixen Sky Sensor was the driver that would communicate with it. I have a serial port, so I need a USB serial adapter. When I plug that into the Windows computer, I don't need a driver. It's detected automatically by Windows 10. The Windows is 64-bit. Initially, I installed the Stellarium 64-bit. Then I downloaded the ASCOM platform, installed it. I downloaded the ASCOM Vixen Sky Sensor driver, which I knew worked with the mount. I ran the diagnostics. That all checked out fine. And then I tried Stellarium. It didn't work. And it took me a while to figure out that I needed the 32-bit version of Stellarium. So I deleted the 64-bit, downloaded the Stellarium 32-bit, and it talks fine to the mount. Even though the OS and the platform are running 64-bit, fine, whatever. But the bottleneck was the mount driver. So with a little bit of luck and some magic, I was able to get all of this working. So that's, again, that's very specific what I'm doing. But you can see in the middle, I needed an ASCOM solution for this to work, and I'm based on the Windows platform. So everybody that's in a similar situation, unusual mount, but you find an ASCOM driver and you're on Windows, this is basically going to be similar to your pathway. So to summarize, I wanted to talk about device independent environments, sort of big picture, what they are, what ASCOM is, what INDI is, show you the website, show you sort of what you need to do if you're going the ASCOM specific route, but reinforce that you might be able to do all of this within the INDI environment. But the broad strokes are you got to download a platform or a server, you need a mount driver. If you're doing camera control, you need all those drivers as well. If you have a robotic observatory, you need those drivers as well, either in ASCOM or INDI. So you're going to have to set all that up. A lot of testing, a lot of configuration there to get that going. But in terms of just driving Stellarium, I said it the wrong way, driving the mount from Stellarium, I just needed my Vixen Sky Sensor driver. I knew that worked. I needed the ASCOM platform. And then I just needed to sort out the cabling and settings in Stellarium. So that's it. Let's go to step 3 now. If you're interested, the data connection, how we connect either physically or by some sort of serial communication method between our computer and the mount. So I'll see you in step 3. Thanks.